Al Capone. How did a kid from Brooklyn, too young to legally rent a car, barely educated, and pulled into the streets before he was fully grown, become the most recognizable face in American crime? Most people think they know Al Capone, the tailored suits, the cigar, the gunman, the legend. But the real story is darker than the myth, because Capone didn't just rise out of Chicago's chaos. He learned how to shape that chaos to his own advantage, until the very city that made him eventually turned against him. And before this story is over, you'll see that the blow that finally brought him down didn't come from a rival's bullet or a judge's dramatic speech, but from something far smaller and far more humiliating. If you're drawn to the brutal, strange, and deeply human corners of American history that textbooks usually leave out, liking the video and subscribing to the channel helps support more stories like this. So if you're ready, let's step into the world that turned Al Capone into a legend. It started in 1899. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born to Gabriel and Teresa, two Italian immigrants chasing the American dream. His father was a barber, his mother a seamstress, honest, law-abiding people. But the streets of Brooklyn in the early 1900s didn't reward honesty. Young Al was bright. He was a B student until the 6th grade, but he had a hair-trigger temper. One punch to a teacher's face ended his education and started his career. He learned his trade not in a classroom, but at the Harvard Inn, a rough Coney Island saloon. This is where he got the marks that defined him. A crude comment to a girl, a brother's quick knife, and 3 slashes across his left cheek changed everything. He hated the name Scarface, but the world would soon learn to fear it. When he landed in Chicago in 1919, he was just a muscle-bound kid with a mentor named Johnny Torrio, the Fox. Torrio was a businessman who happened to be a gangster, and he saw potential in Capone's raw power. Then came 1920. Prohibition. Suddenly, a barrel of beer that cost $5 to make could be sold for $55. It was the greatest gold mine in history, and it turned Chicago into a war zone. After Torrio survived a hit that left him riddled with lead, he handed the keys of the kingdom to a 26-year-old Al Capone. Al didn't just run a gang, he ran the outfit. He bought politicians, judges, and the mayor himself, Big Bill Thompson. He lived in the Metropole Hotel's 50 rooms with a private gym and a revolving door for the city's elite. He was a celebrity, a man of the people who opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression, cultivating a Robin Hood image while his guerrillas enforced his will with lead. But the peak is always followed by a cliff. February 14, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 men from Bugs Moran's rival gang were lined up against a garage wall and turned into Swiss cheese by gunmen dressed as police. Capone was in Florida, sunning himself. The perfect alibi. But the gore of those photos shocked a nation that had previously tolerated his antics. He became public enemy number 1. The president wanted him gone. Yet, for all the bodies he'd allegedly dropped, the law couldn't pin a single murder on him. He was untouchable, protected by a wall of silence and blood. The end didn't come with a Tommy gun. It came with a green eye shade. A quiet, geeky accountant named Frank Wilson spent months digging through boxes of confiscated ledgers. He found a single book from a Cicero gambling den that listed Capone's name and his profits. But the final nail was a letter from Capone's own lawyer, Lawrence Mattingly, who admitted in writing that Al had a taxable income. It was a catastrophic legal blunder. In 1931, the man who owned Chicago was sentenced to 11 years for the one crime he couldn't bribe his way out of: tax evasion. Prison broke him. At Alcatraz, the rock, the silence, and the salt air were a slow death. The syphilis he'd contracted as a wild teenager in Brooklyn finally reached his brain. By the time he was released in 1939, the king of the underworld was a ghost. He spent his final years in a Florida villa, his mind regressing until he had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child. He died in 1947, not by a rival's bullet, but by a stroke and a heart that simply gave up. Al Capone remains the ultimate American anti-hero, a man who proved that you can climb to the very top, but if you build your throne on blood and paper, it's only a matter of time before the foundation crumbles. If Al Capone could see the empire he left behind, would he think the power was worth the price of his mind?